Story 1. The basement door was never locked. I never liked basements. Even as a kid, there was something about being underground that made my chest feel tight, like the walls were slowly leaning inward, like the earth itself was listening. Still, when you grow up in the Midwest, basements are just part of life. You store Christmas decorations there, old furniture. Sometimes, if money is tight, you rent a room down there and tell yourself it's temporary. That's what I did. In the fall of 2014, I moved to a small town in western Pennsylvania after landing a contract job at a manufacturing plant. The pay wasn't great, and housing options were limited. I found a listing on Craigslist: private basement room for rent, quiet neighborhood, utilities included. The rent was cheap, too cheap. I met the homeowner, a man named Daniel Harper, in his late 50s. He looked normal enough, soft-spoken, slightly overweight, always smiling, but never with his eyes. He lived alone in a 2-story house that looked ordinary from the outside. White siding, a neatly trimmed lawn, American flag on the porch. When he showed me the basement, I noticed right away how clean it was. No dust, no clutter, just one bedroom, a small bathroom, and a narrow hallway leading to a locked door at the far end. "What's behind that?" I asked, nodding toward it. Daniel barely glanced at it. "Old storage, nothing important." The door was metal, thick, industrial-looking, not something you'd expect in a residential basement. But I didn't push it. I needed a place to stay. I moved in that weekend. The first week was quiet, almost too quiet. Daniel rarely came downstairs. Sometimes I'd hear him walking overhead late at night, slow footsteps pacing back and forth, as if he couldn't sleep. The basement itself was always cold, even when the heater was running, and there was a smell, faint, metallic, mixed with something sour. I assumed it was just old pipes. The first strange thing happened on a Tuesday night. I woke up around 2:17 a.m. to the sound of scraping. At first I thought it was a mouse, but it was too heavy, too deliberate. It sounded like something being dragged slowly across concrete. The noise was coming from the hallway, from behind that locked metal door. I sat up in bed, listening. Scrape. Pause. Scrape. My phone buzzed with a notification. No signal in the basement, but the time glowed on the screen. 2:19 a.m. Then the sound stopped. The next morning, I asked Daniel about it casually, trying not to sound paranoid. "Oh, probably the pipes," he said quickly. "Old house." He smiled, but his hands were shaking as he poured his coffee. Over the next few weeks, the noises became more frequent, always late at night, always from behind that door. Sometimes it sounded like scratching, sometimes like muffled thumps. Once I could have sworn I heard a voice. Low, weak, not words exactly, more like strained breathing, as if someone was trying to scream without making a sound. I started sleeping with headphones on. One night I noticed something else. I always locked my basement door before going to bed, always. But twice I woke up to find it unlocked. The third time it was open. Just a few inches, enough to let the hallway light spill into my room. I confronted Daniel again. He looked genuinely confused, or very good at pretending. "I never go down there," he said. "Must be the latch." That night I wedged a chair under the handle. It didn't help. Around this time I started noticing stains on the concrete floor near the metal door. Dark stains. Old ones. They looked like rust, but the shape was wrong, uneven, like something had soaked into the floor and never quite washed out.
I also noticed the smell getting worse. One Friday evening, I came home early from work. Daniel's car wasn't in the driveway. The house was silent. For the first time, curiosity outweighed fear. I stood in the hallway staring at the metal door. It wasn't locked. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and slowly pulled the door open. What I saw on the other side changed my life. The room beyond was not storage. It was a cell. Concrete walls, no windows, chains bolted into the floor, a stained mattress shoved into a corner, and on the wall, deep gouges as if someone had clawed at it over and over again. The smell hit me at once. Rot, blood, human waste. I stepped back, gagging. That's when I saw the camera, mounted in the corner of the ceiling, pointed directly toward the mattress. I ran. I didn't pack, I didn't lock the door. I ran up the basement stairs, out the front door, and didn't stop until I reached my car. I drove straight to the police station. At first they were skeptical. Then they searched the house. Daniel Harper was arrested that night. What they found in the basement made the local news, though most of the details were never released to the public. Daniel had been holding people captive, mostly runaways, homeless men, people no one would immediately notice were missing. Some had been held for weeks, some longer, some never made it out alive. The stains on the floor weren't rust, they were blood. Daniel had been reported as a quiet, helpful neighbor, no criminal record, no prior complaints. The police later told me something that still makes my skin crawl. That metal door, it was never locked. Not from the outside. It locked from the inside. Whoever was down there had been locking themselves in. To this day, I still wake up in the middle of the night, convinced I hear scraping on concrete. And I still check my door. Twice.
Story 2. Something was raising my son in the basement. When my wife Emily and I bought the house, the basement was the last thing on our minds. We were newly married, pregnant with our first child, and desperate to get out of our cramped apartment in Ohio. The house was old, built sometime in the 1940s, but it had character. Hardwood floors, a big backyard, quiet street. The previous owners had lived there for decades. The realtor hesitated when we asked about the basement. "It's unfinished," she said, "mostly used for storage." That didn't bother us. Most basements in that area were unfinished. What bothered me was how she avoided eye contact when she said it. The first time I went down there, I felt it immediately. The stairs creaked loudly, each step echoing as if the space below was hollow in a way it shouldn't be. The air was damp, thick, and strangely warm. The basement lights flickered, revealing concrete walls covered in old chalk markings, symbols, lines, numbers that made no sense. "Probably kids," Emily said when I mentioned it. I agreed. I wanted to agree. Our son, Noah, was born 6 months later. At first, life was normal, exhausting but normal. Late nights, crying, feedings, the house felt alive. Then Noah started doing things babies shouldn't be able to do. When he was barely 8 months old, he began crawling toward the basement door. Every time. No matter where we put him, he'd turn his head, lock his eyes on that door, and crawl toward it like something was calling him. The first time we laughed. The second time, Emily looked uncomfortable. By the 5th time, we installed a lock. That night, Noah screamed. Not cried, screamed. It was a sound I had never heard come from a child before. Raw, terrified, desperate. Emily rushed into his room while I followed close behind. He was standing in his crib,
standing at 8 months, pointing at the ceiling. "Da! Da!" he whispered. The screaming stopped the moment I picked him up. Over the next few weeks, Noah started changing. He became quiet, observant, too observant. He'd sit on the floor and stare at corners of rooms, tracking something invisible with his eyes. Sometimes he'd smile at nothing. Other times he'd flinch like someone had touched him. The pediatrician said he was advanced. I wasn't convinced. One night, around 1:30 a.m., I woke up to the sound of footsteps, soft, bare feet, coming from the basement stairs. I froze in bed listening. The steps stopped just outside Noah's room. Then the door creaked open. Emily sat up beside me. "Did you hear that?" I nodded. We rushed into Noah's room. It was empty. The crib was empty. The window was closed, the door wide open. Then we heard it, a soft humming sound, coming from the basement. Emily started crying. I grabbed a flashlight and ran downstairs. The basement light was on, and sitting on the bottom steps was Noah, not crying, not scared, smiling, facing the dark corner near the far wall. "Honey," I whispered, trying to stay calm, "Daddy's here." Noah didn't look at me. He lifted his tiny hand and waved. "Night-night," he said, to something I couldn't see. I grabbed him and ran back upstairs. That night, Emily begged me to call the police. But what would I say? My baby was talking to something in the basement? The next morning, I checked the basement more carefully. Behind some old shelves, I found a door, a small door, child-sized, painted over so many times it blended into the wall. It was locked. The lock was on the outside. I broke it open. Inside was a narrow space, barely tall enough for an adult to crouch. The walls were scratched, the floor was stained dark, and carved in the back wall, in uneven letters, were words. "He lives down here. He likes the children. Don't let them see him." I slammed the door shut. Emily wanted to leave immediately, but we couldn't afford to, not yet. So we stayed. And whatever was in that basement didn't like that. Noah started sleepwalking. At first it was small things, standing in the hallway at night, mumbling. Then it escalated. Twice I found him sitting at the top of the basement stairs. Once the basement door was open, wide open. Emily started having nightmares. She said she felt watched, that something was standing at the foot of the bed at night, breathing. I felt it too. The house no longer felt empty. One evening, while Emily was grocery shopping, I heard Noah laughing. From the basement. I dropped everything and ran downstairs. The light was off. The laughter echoed softly, bouncing off the walls. "Noah?" I called. The laughter stopped. Then a voice spoke, not a child's voice, low, crooked. "He's happier with me." I grabbed Noah from the shadows and sprinted upstairs. That night we packed. We didn't care about money anymore. As we were loading the car, the basement light turned on by itself. Something moved behind the window, watching. We left the house that night and never went back. Months later, we learned the truth. The house belonged to a Eugene Keller in the 1960s. He kidnapped children, kept them in the basement, raised one of them. When police finally raided the house, they found bodies, but they never found Eugene or the child he raised. The house still stands, families still move in, and sometimes neighbors report hearing a child laughing from the basement, even when no children live there.
Story 3. The basement was already occupied. I found the house through a foreclosure listing. I was divorced, broke, and desperate for a fresh start. The house sat on the edge of a quiet suburb in upstate New York. Nothing fancy, but cheap enough that I could afford it outright. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and a basement the size of the entire house. The bank paperwork mentioned nothing unusual. No disclosures, no warnings. That should have been my first red flag. The first time I walked into the basement, I noticed how finished it was. Carpeted floor, paneled walls, a small kitchenette in the corner. Almost like someone had lived down there for a long time. But there was no furniture, no personal items, just empty space. I moved in during the winter of 2019. Snow piled high outside, cutting the house off from most neighbors. The isolation felt comforting at first, until I realized I wasn't alone. The first night I heard the basement TV turn on. Static, low volume. I assumed I'd forgotten to unplug something. I went downstairs. The basement was dark, silent. No TV, no sound. The second night I heard footsteps, slow, careful, pacing from one end of the basement to the other. I stood at the top of the stairs, listening. "Hello?" I called. The footsteps stopped, then resumed, closer. I retreated upstairs and locked my bedroom door like a child. Over the next few days, things started moving. Small things at first. A chair repositioned, cabinets left open, the basement light always on when I knew I'd turned it off. I set up a cheap security camera pointing down the basement stairs. The footage from the first night showed nothing unusual. The second night, it showed something I can't explain. At exactly 3:11 a.m., the basement door slowly opened, and someone walked up the stairs. The camera didn't glitch. The image was clear. It was a man, barefoot, shirtless, pale to the point of gray. He stopped halfway up the stairs and turned his head toward the camera and smiled. I didn't sleep after that. I called the police the next morning. They searched the house, found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no evidence anyone else was living there. They told me stress can do strange things. That night, the camera caught him again. This time, he went back down the stairs, dragging something behind him. I sold the camera the next day, but it didn't matter, because whatever he was, he knew I could see him. I started hearing whispering through the vents, sometimes my name, sometimes phrases that didn't make sense. "You're early. This was never yours. We were here first." One night, I woke up unable to move. Sleep paralysis, I told myself, until I felt pressure on my chest, breathing, cold breath against my face, and a voice inches from my ear. "This house doesn't stay empty." I moved out of my bedroom after that and slept on the couch upstairs. It didn't help. Every night at 3:11, the basement door would open. Sometimes I heard footsteps, sometimes dragging, sometimes crying, human crying. I started researching the house. The truth was buried deep in local archives. In 1978, the house had been owned by a man named Richard Hale. He rented out the basement to drifters, migrant workers, runaways, people who needed cheap shelter, people who wouldn't be missed. Over the course of 10 years, 9 people disappeared, all last seen entering that house. Police suspected Richard but never had proof. When they finally searched the house in 1989, they found human remains sealed inside the basement walls. Richard was never arrested. He disappeared before charges could be filed. The house was renovated. The basement was finished. The walls sealed. I realized then that I hadn't bought an empty house. I'd bought a grave. The final night I stayed there, I heard the basement door open earlier than usual. 1:47 a.m. The footsteps didn't stay downstairs. They came up, step by step, slow, deliberate.
The living room light flicked on by itself, and there he was, standing at the bottom of the stairs, closer than ever. His face was wrong, not decomposed, preserved, like something that never finished dying. You weren't supposed to stay. We keep it full. I ran. I didn't grab my keys. I didn't grab my phone. I ran barefoot into the snow and didn't stop until I reached the highway. The house was demolished 6 months later. Official reason, structural damage. But the workers refused to stay past sunset. They said they heard voices from underground, arguing, fighting, begging. They say the basement was never empty. It was just waiting.